The sun rose over the village of Tamu, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the sounds of children laughing as they played outside. For 6-year-old Nia, it was supposed to be a special day, her birthday. She had always imagined birthdays as magical, filled with cakes, songs, and warm hugs. But today, she sat on the cold floor of a small mud brick home, hugging her knees. Tears rolled down her cheeks silently, one after the other, because crying out loud was dangerous. Her mother, Wanjiku, stomped around the tiny house, her face twisted in anger. "This house is a mess. Nia, can you do anything right?" Her voice was sharp, slicing through Nia's fragile heart. Nia wanted to explain. She had tried her best to clean the house while dreaming of a small celebration, just her and Mama. But as she opened her mouth to speak, Wanjiku grabbed an old plate and hurled it against the wall. It shattered with a loud crash, and Nia flinched, clutching her chest. "Don't you dare talk back to me," Wanjiku screamed. Outside, the sound of birthday songs from the neighbors only made the silence in Nia's home louder. She peeked out the window, watching a group of children chase each other with colorful balloons. She longed to join them, to feel a moment of joy, but she knew better than to ask. When evening came, the situation wasn't. Nia spilled a cup of water while trying to wash a plate. Her mother's fury erupted like a storm. Wanjiku grabbed Nia's arm and shook her so hard that her small body stumbled. "You useless child, you ruin everything." As the sun set, painting long shadows on the walls, Nia sat in a corner, hugging her knees tightly. Her cheeks stung from the slap she had received earlier, but the pain in her heart was worse. On this, her 6th birthday, she made a silent wish to feel safe, even just for one day. But safety was a luxury she could not afford. Night in Tamu brought a chilling quiet. The village, so alive with the sounds of children and mothers calling them home during the day, turned eerily still. In Nia's house, the cold seemed to seep through the walls, and fear hung in the air like a heavy curtain. Her father, Kariuki, stumbled into the house late that night. His footsteps were uneven, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Where's my dinner?" he barked, his voice so loud that it made Nia's small hands tremble. Wanjiku rushed to prepare something, her hands shaking as she worked. Kariuki's temper was unpredictable, and when he didn't find what he wanted, he turned his wrath on Nia. "You! What are you doing just sitting there?" he shouted. Before she could answer, his hand swung down hard across her face. The force knocked her to the ground. Nia's lip quivered, but she didn't make a sound. Crying would only make things worse. Later, as the house settled into an uneasy quiet, another shadow crept into her life. Her uncle Juma, who had been staying with them for months, slithered into her corner. At first, Juma had seemed kind. He called her "my little princess" and brought her sweets, things her parents never did. But at night, his true nature came out. He whispered vile things in her ear, his rough hand clamping over her mouth. "Don't make a sound," he hissed. "If you tell anyone, your mother will hate you even more." Nia's small body froze in terror. She didn't understand why these things happened to her, only that they did, night after night. She stopped praying for things to get better, and instead wished for the courage to disappear. But even in her darkest moments, a tiny spark of hope remained. She dreamed of someone, anyone, coming to save her. School was Nia's only escape, but even there, her pain followed her. She was no longer the bright, curious child her teachers had once known. She became quiet, blending into the background like a shadow. Her eyes, once full of wonder, now stared blankly at the floor. She avoided playing with the other children and flinched if someone accidentally brushed against her. Her teacher, Miss Atino, began to notice the change. One afternoon, as the children packed up to leave, she called Nia to her desk. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked gently. Nia nodded quickly, her forced smile cracking under the weight of her tears. "I'm fine, teacher," she whispered. But Miss Atino wasn't convinced. She saw the faint bruises on Nia's arms and the haunted look in her eyes. Something was very wrong, and she resolved to find out what. The next day during art class, Miss Ateno gave the students an assignment. Draw something that makes you happy. Most of the children drew colorful pictures of their families, pets, or toys. Nia's drawing was different. It showed a small figure sitting alone in a dark room. Heavy black strokes filled the corners of the page. After class, Miss Atieno gently took Nia's drawing. "Can you tell me about this picture?" she asked softly. Nia hesitated, her small hands trembling. "It's just a room," she said. "Why is it so dark?" Miss Atieno pressed, her voice kind but firm. Nia's lip quivered. She looked at her teacher, her eyes pleading for help, but fear kept her silent. Miss Ateno's heart broke. She knew she had to act, but she also knew the risks. Confronting such darkness could bring consequences. Still, she couldn't ignore the signs. Miss Ateno made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She resolved to uncover the truth and give Nia the voice she desperately needed. The school bell rang, signaling the end of another day. But Nia's world felt heavier than ever. Miss Ateno had asked her to stay behind, and though her voice was soft, Nia's heart raced. What if the teacher could see the secrets she kept buried deep inside? As the last student left the room, Miss Ateno knelt by Nia's desk. "You know," she said gently, "sometimes we carry things that are too heavy to hold alone." Her kind eyes met Nia's. "You don't have to tell me, but if you ever want to, I'll listen." Nia felt the words catch in her throat. She had lived in silence for so long, the thought of speaking felt like stepping off a cliff. But something in Miss Ateno's calmness made her feel for the first time that maybe, just maybe, someone could help. The next morning, Nia found herself in Miss Ateno's office again. This time, she spoke, her voice a trembling whisper. "My uncle, he hurts me, and my father hits me. Mama just watches." The words spilled out like a flood. She couldn't stop. Miss Atieno listened without interruption, tears shining in her eyes. "Nia, you are so brave," she said. "I promise I'll help you, but I need you to trust me." For a moment, Nia panicked. Trust had always betrayed her. But the teacher's steady reassurance made her take a leap. "Okay," she whispered. That evening, as Nia sat alone in the shelter of her room, she wondered if this spark of courage would burn her or set her free. The next day, the small village of Tamu buzzed with whispers. A pair of officers stood outside Nia's home, their presence as loud as thunder in the quiet neighborhood. Wanjiku's anger exploded as they explained why they were there. "She's lying!" Wanjiku yelled, her face a mix of rage and fear. "That girl has always been trouble." But when Nia stepped out, her tiny frame trembling but defiant, the words silenced the chaos. "I'm not lying," she said, her voice barely audible. "They hurt me, all of them." The officers led Nia away, shielding her from her mother's furious protests. Inside the car, Nia felt a strange mix of fear and relief. She wasn't sure if she was escaping her nightmare or walking into another unknown. The fallout was swift. News spread like wildfire, dividing the community. Some neighbors rallied around Wanjiku, calling Nia's accusations an attack on tradition and family. Others, emboldened by Nia's bravery, began sharing their own whispers of abuse. The village was no longer silent, and for many, this was the most terrifying part. Nia's new home wasn't much, but to her, it felt like a palace. The shelter's walls were painted with bright colors, and the staff spoke with kindness she'd never known. Asha, one of the caregivers, knelt to meet Nia at eye level on her first night. "You're safe here," she said, her voice like a warm blanket. For the first time in years, Nia slept deeply. No shouting, no hands grabbing her, no dark corners where monsters hid, just silence and the soft hum of a fan. The next day, Nia met Miriam, a counselor who would become her anchor. "We're going to talk about the hard things," Miriam explained, "but only when you're ready." At first, Nia didn't speak much. She was used to silence, to words being weapons. But Miriam's patience slowly coaxed her voice back. Each session felt like peeling away a layer of armor, revealing wounds that had never been allowed to heal. One day, during art therapy, Nia drew a picture of a small bird in a broken cage. When Miriam asked her about it, Nia smiled faintly. "It's me," she said, "but one day I'll fly." As the weeks turned into months, Nia began to believe it. The other children at the shelter became her family, each of them carrying their own scars but sharing a bond of survival. They played, laughed, and cried together, slowly rebuilding what had been broken. But Nia's journey wasn't just about healing, it was about justice. She worked with advocates to prepare for the court hearings against her uncle and father. The thought of facing them again made her stomach churn, but she knew it was necessary. When the day came, Nia stood in the courtroom, her small figure dwarfed by the imposing walls. With trembling hands, she held onto a stuffed animal Miriam had given her for comfort. She recounted her story with a bravery that stunned everyone in the room. Her uncle Juma was sentenced to a long prison term. Her father received a shorter sentence with mandatory rehabilitation. Wanjiku was given a choice: intensive therapy and proof of change, or she would never see Nia again. As the gavel fell, Nia felt a strange weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't over. Healing would take time, but for the first time, she saw a glimmer of a future where she could be free. The village of Tamu buzzed with tension as the trial of Juma, Karuki, and Wanjiku unfolded. It wasn't just a case, it was a spotlight shining on the culture of silence that had festered for generations. Juma, arrogant and unrepentant, sat stiffly in the defendant's chair. He denied everything, but his smug demeanor cracked when the prosecutor presented irrefutable evidence. Testimonies from neighbors, medical reports, and Nia's own brave account. When it was Nia's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. She stepped forward, her small frame shaking, but her eyes resolute. The prosecutor handed her a microphone, and Nia gripped it tightly as if it was her lifeline. "I don't want to be scared anymore," she began, her voice trembling but clear. "I want to be free." As she recounted the nights, Juma crept into her room. Her father's rage-filled fists and her mother's cold indifference gasps echoed in the courtroom. Her words painted a vivid, heartbreaking picture, leaving no doubt about the horror she had endured. Juma's defense lawyer attempted to discredit her, calling her just a child with a vivid imagination. But Nia's voice cut through. "Why would I make this up?" she asked, her innocence piercing through the lawyer's feeble arguments. When the verdict came, the room seemed to hold its breath. The judge's voice rang out. Juma, you are sentenced to 20 years in prison for assault and abuse. Karoki, you will serve 5 years and undergo mandatory rehabilitation. Wanjiku, you will not regain custody of your daughter without completing therapy and demonstrating your ability to provide a safe home. Outside the courthouse, the community was divided. Some praised Nia's bravery, while others whispered about family shame. But for Nia, the battle wasn't about their approval. It was about reclaiming her life. The years that followed were not easy, but they were transformative. Nia stayed at the shelter, where she blossomed under the care of people who genuinely loved and supported her. Miriam, her counselor, became her closest confidant. During one session, Miriam gave her a journal. Write down your dreams, she encouraged. You've been through so much, but you still have the power to shape your future. Nia took the advice to heart. She filled the pages with colorful drawings and descriptions of the life she wanted, one filled with art, laughter, and freedom. At the shelter school, she discovered her love for painting. Her art teacher, Mr. Amondi, noticed her talent and nurtured it. You have a gift, he told her. Your art tells stories that words cannot. Through her art, Naya processed her pain and found her voice. Her drawings, once filled with dark shadows, began to feature bright colors and hopeful themes. One painting, a soaring bird above an open cage, became a symbol of her resilience. Meanwhile, Wanjiku was undergoing her own transformation. Therapy forced her to confront her childhood traumas, her abusive marriage, and the harm she had inflicted on Nia. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the guilt and shame she had buried for years. I want to make amends, Wanjiku told her therapist one day, but I don't know if Nia will ever forgive me. When the time came for their first meeting, Nia, now a teenager, approached it with trepidation. Seeing her mother again stirred up a storm of emotions: anger, sadness, and a tiny flicker of hope. I failed you, Wanjiku began, tears streaming down her face. I let my pain blind me to yours. I can't change the past, but I want to make it right. Please let me try. Nia hesitated. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and the wounds ran deep. But she also saw the sincerity in her mother's eyes. Slowly, she stepped forward and hugged her. I'm not ready to forget, she said, her voice steady, but I want to try. That moment marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. Years later, Nia's artwork gained recognition. Her exhibitions drew crowds, and her pieces inspired others to confront their own struggles. One of her most celebrated works, titled The Spark of Courage, depicted a small girl standing in the dark, holding a lantern that lit the way forward. When asked about the inspiration behind her work, Nia would often say, "It's not just my story. It's the story of everyone who's ever felt trapped in the dark, but found a way to let the light in." As for Wanjiku, she became an advocate for abused children, using her own painful past to educate others and fight for change. Though their relationship remained a work in progress, Nia and Wanjiku found a new kind of love, a love built on honesty, effort, and mutual healing.